I don't scare easily. I want to say that up front, not because I'm trying to sound tough, but because I know how these kinds of stories go. Someone hears a noise. They assume the worst. Turns out it's a raccoon or a branch against the window or their own imagination running at full speed in the dark. And by the time they figure that out, they've already called 3 people and cried twice. That's not me. Never has been. I grew up in a house where the power went out every other winter storm, and my mom would just light candles and keep reading her book. No panic, no drama, just adapt. I inherited that from her, I think. The ability to look at something unsettling and find the most boring explanation for it before I let myself spiral. So when I tell you that what happened at my Aunt Carla's house scared me in a way I still haven't fully shaken, I need you to understand what that means, coming from me. My Aunt Carla lives about 4 hours north of me in a small town that doesn't have a lot going on but has a lake, which is apparently enough. She's been there 15 years, retired early from a job in insurance, bought a house she described as cozy, which actually meant small but in a good neighborhood, and settled in. She grows tomatoes in the summer. She has a cat named Biscuit, who hates everyone, including her. She drives to church on Sundays and to the grocery store on Thursdays and pretty much nowhere else. She is, by any measure, one of the least dramatic people I've ever met, which is probably why I've always liked her. In October, this past October, she called me and asked if I could house sit for 2 weeks while she went to visit her sister in Florida. Her sister, my Aunt Donna, had just had hip surgery and needed help getting around. Carla doesn't fly, so she was going to drive down, which meant she'd be gone at least 2 weeks, probably closer to 3. I was between projects at the time. I freelance graphic design, mostly for small businesses and nonprofits, so my schedule has a flexibility that regular 9-to-5 people tend to either envy or pity, depending on how things are going. At that point, things were going fine. I had one deadline at the end of the month and nothing else pressing. An extended stay in a quiet lake town with no social obligations sounded less like a favor and more like a retreat. I said yes without even thinking about it. Carla left on a Tuesday. I drove up that same morning so she could walk me through everything before she headed out. She showed me the thermostat, which was old and took a specific sequence of button presses to change the temperature. She showed me where Biscuit's food was and the specific bowl he'd eat from, and the other bowl she'd tried to switch him to once and how that had gone. She showed me the circuit breaker in the basement and the key to the shed out back in case I needed the lawn equipment, though she didn't think I'd need it in October. And then, before she left, she took a key off a hook by the back door and handed it to me. "Front door," she said. "Keep it with you. There's a deadbolt too, the little twist one. You can use that at night." I took the key and put it in my jacket pocket. She hugged me, told me not to let Biscuit guilt me into extra feedings, and got in her car and left. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I worked in the mornings at the kitchen table with coffee and the kind of quiet you genuinely cannot find in a city. I took walks around the lake in the afternoons. I made real dinners instead of whatever I could assemble from what was left in my fridge at home. I read at night. Biscuit pretended I didn't exist, which I respected. It was on the 4th day Friday that I noticed the key. I was getting ready to go pick up some groceries, and I went to grab my jacket off the hook by the back door. And that's when I saw it. Hanging on the same hook where my jacket was. A key. I stopped. The hook was a small wooden thing mounted next to the back door. One of those old-fashioned country-style hooks with like 3 or 4 pegs on it. Carla used it for jackets and the occasional tote bag. When she'd shown me around the house, the only thing hanging on it was my jacket. Now there was a key on it. I stood there for a second just looking at it. My first thought, honestly, was that I'd put it there. That I'd had two keys somehow, or grabbed the wrong thing, or done something I'd already forgotten. You know how your brain tries to protect you from the thing it doesn't want to process? That was my brain, right then, working overtime. I reached out and took it off the hook. It wasn't my key. The one Carla had given me had a small blue rubber cover on the top. A lot of people put those on to distinguish their keys, and it was already on my keychain, in my jacket pocket, where I'd put it 4 days ago. This key was bare metal, plain, a little worn. I turned it over in my hand. House key. Looked the same age in general style as the one Carla had given me. My most immediate thought was that it was a spare. That Carla had a spare key somewhere in the house, and I just hadn't noticed it, and it had been there the whole time, and I somehow walked past it 4 times a day for 4 days without registering it. That's plausible, right? We tune out things that seem like they belong. A key on a hook in a house looks like it belongs there. And that was the boring explanation. That was the raccoon and branches explanation, and I wanted to believe it. But something about it bothered me, something I couldn't quite name yet. I set the key down on the kitchen counter and texted Carla. Hey, is there a spare key somewhere in the house? Found one on the hook by the back door. She was 4 hours away. Probably not looking at her phone. I figured I'd hear back in a few hours, pocketed my own key, and went to get groceries. She texted back while I was in the cereal aisle. What key? I only made 1 copy. That's the one I gave you. I read it twice. Then I put the cereal back and drove to the house. I know that might sound like an overreaction, and maybe it was. But here's the thing about that text. It wasn't ambiguous. Carla's not the type to be vague or forgetful about something like that. When she'd handed me the key, she'd been deliberate about it. Front door. Keep it with you. She wasn't scatterbrained. She wasn't someone who had a junk drawer full of mystery keys and had just forgotten one. She was organized in the particular way that people who've lived alone for a long time tend to be. Everything had a place, and she knew where everything was. I only made 1 copy. Then where did that key come from? I got back to the house, and I stood in the kitchen, and I looked at the key sitting on the counter, and I tried to think through it logically. Possibilities. Carla was wrong. She'd made a second copy at some point for a neighbor, for a cleaning person, for her sister, for anyone, and just didn't remember. That happens. That's probably what happened. People forget things. Or the key had been here before Carla. Old house, previous owners. Someone had a copy made years ago, and it had just been sitting in a drawer somewhere and somehow ended up on the hook. That's also plausible. Weird, but plausible. Or someone had been in this house recently, and they'd left it there. I picked up the key, and that's when I noticed it. It was warm. I know how that sounds. I know. Keys don't generate heat. If it was sitting on a counter in a room temperature house, it would be room temperature. Metal especially tends to run a little cool. I should have picked it up, and it should have felt like nothing, just a key. It was warm the way something is warm when someone has been holding it. I put it down. I took a breath. I told myself that I was working myself up, that I'd had the key in my hand in the parking lot of the grocery store, that I'd warmed it myself without realizing, that this was my nervous system inventing symptoms to match a story I'd already half told myself. I almost believed it. I called Carla instead of texting this time. She picked up on the second ring, and I told her what I'd noticed, the key, where it was. what she'd said. I asked her again, calmly, if there was anyone who had a copy, a neighbor, a friend, anyone who watched the house when she was away. She was quiet for a second. There was a woman, she said. Sandra lived 2 houses down. She used to have a key for emergencies, watering plants, that kind of thing. But Sandra moved 2 years ago, and I got my key back from her before she left. I remember because I put it in the little dish on my dresser. Is it still there? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I don't know, she said. I haven't looked in a while. Shay, what's going on? You're scaring me a little. I told her I wasn't sure yet and that I'd call her back. Then I went upstairs to her bedroom. The little dish on her dresser was exactly where she described it. Small ceramic thing, painted blue, sitting next to a photo of her and Donna at some beach in the 90s. It had a few things in it. A ring she didn't wear anymore, 2 quarters, a folded receipt, no key. I went back downstairs and looked at the key on the counter again. Then I walked to the back door and checked the lock. The door was locked. I'd locked it myself when I left for the store. The deadbolt was set. Everything looked normal. No signs of anything forced. The window above the sink was latched. The window in the living room was latched. I went through every room, every window, every possible entry point, and found nothing. Which should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because here's the thing about a key. The whole point of a key is that you don't need to force anything. You just walk in, and then you walk back out, and you lock the door behind you, and everything looks exactly the way it looked before you got there. I called Carla back and told her about the dish. She was quiet for a long time. Do you want to come home? I asked. I can stay somewhere else. I don't want you to... No, she said, no. Donna needs me. A pause. Is the key the same as the one I gave you? Same brand, same... I don't know, it looks similar. There's a hardware store about a mile from the house. Main Street, you'll see it. The man who runs it has been cutting keys in that town for 30 years. Another pause. He might recognize it. I hadn't thought of that. I took a photo of the key and drove to the hardware store. The man behind the counter was probably in his mid-60s, with the particular energy of someone who had done one specific thing very well for a very long time and felt no need to explain himself to anyone. I showed him the photo on my phone first, and he squinted at it, and then I put the actual key on the counter in front of him. He picked it up, turned it over, looked at the side stamp. Schlage, he said. Common enough. He looked at me. What do you need to know? I explained as simply as I could that I was house-sitting for my aunt, that the key had turned up unexpectedly, and that I was trying to figure out where it came from. He looked at it again. Can't tell you who had it made, but I can tell you this one wasn't cut here. He handed it back. I keep a particular edge profile on my cuts. This one's different. Whoever made this copy used a machine I don't have. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he'd probably said 1,000 other unremarkable things that day. But to me, standing there in that small hardware store with that key in my hand, it landed like something heavy. Carla had gotten her spare key back from Sandra 2 years ago and put it in the dish on her dresser. But the key in the dish was gone. And now there was a different key not cut locally, not cut in this store, that had made every house key in this neighborhood for 30 years. Someone had made a copy and left the copy behind. I drove back to the house. I need to tell you what that drive felt like, because I think it's important. It wasn't panic. It wasn't a movie moment where the music swells and the main character has a breakdown. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of something reorganizing inside you, the version of reality you'd been carrying around, getting quietly replaced by a different one. Someone had been in my aunt's house, not just that night or that week. This suggested a pattern. Someone had taken the spare key at some point, or had taken it long ago, had a copy made somewhere that wasn't the local hardware store, and then, for some reason, had left that copy on the hook by the back door. Why leave it? That was the question that sat with me the hardest. If you have a copy of someone's house key and you want to keep accessing their house, you don't leave the copy behind. You keep it. Leaving it means one of two things. Either you made a mistake, you left it accidentally, or you got interrupted, or you left it on purpose. And if you left it on purpose, then why? What does it mean to leave someone a key to their own house? I didn't have a good answer. I'm not sure I have one now. I called the non-emergency police line when I got back. The officer I spoke to was polite and patient and deeply, visibly unconvinced that anything had happened. I described the key, what I'd found, what the hardware store man had said. He asked if anything was missing. I said no, nothing I could find. He asked if there were any signs of forced entry. I said no. He asked if my aunt had any disputes with anyone in the neighborhood, any history of issues. I said not that I knew of. He said he'd send someone to take a look. And about 40 minutes later, a younger officer came and walked through the house with me. She looked at everything I'd looked at, checked the same windows, looked at the key. She was kind about it, kinder than the guy on the phone had been, but the conclusion was the same. No visible evidence of a crime. No way to lift meaningful prints from a house key. No actionable next steps beyond making sure the locks were secure. You might want to consider getting the locks changed, she said before she left. If the key is a copy of the original, changing the locks would make any copies invalid. I said I'd talk to my aunt about it. She nodded. Then, almost like an afterthought, she said, "You said the key was warm when you picked it up?" "Yeah." She looked at me for a moment. Didn't say anything right away. "How long had you been gone when you went to the store?" "About 45 minutes." She nodded again, slowly. Then she said, "The house looks fine. Get those locks changed if you can." And she left. She didn't say what she was thinking, but I could tell she was thinking something. I didn't sleep well that night. I won't pretend I did. I lay in the guest room with the lights off, and Biscuit a surprising and uncharacteristic presence at the foot of the bed. Apparently warmth trumped his disdain for strangers. And I thought about the key. I thought about what 45 minutes means. I was gone 45 minutes. Long enough for someone to come into the house, walk around, and leave. Long enough to do whatever they'd come to do. Short enough that I'd have just missed them. I thought about whether it was possible that someone had been watching the house, watching for when I'd leave, knowing I'd be gone long enough. I thought about Carla, about 15 years in that neighborhood, a routine so regular you could set a clock to it. The grocery store on Thursdays, church on Sundays. How easy it would be if you wanted to know someone's schedule, to simply pay attention. And then I thought about something I hadn't thought about yet. Carla doesn't usually leave. She drives to Florida maybe once a year to see Donna. That was known. Her neighbors knew. Her church probably knew. Which meant someone might have known the house would be occupied by someone new, someone who didn't know the neighborhood, Someone who might not notice. But I noticed. And maybe that was the thing they hadn't counted on. I called a locksmith the next morning. He came out that afternoon and changed every lock in the house front door, back door, the side door into the garage. I paid for it myself. Carla tried to argue about it when I told her, and I told her not to worry about it. I stayed the full 2 weeks, like I'd promised. I'm not someone who runs, and I'd told Carla I'd be there, and I meant it. But I stopped taking walks after dark. I started checking the hooks by the back door every morning. I kept my phone on the nightstand. Nothing else happened. No more keys, no sounds I couldn't explain, no sense of presence. But here's the thing about that. Nothing happening doesn't mean nothing was going to happen. It just means it didn't. We found out about a week later that Carla's old neighbor, Sandra, the woman who had originally held the spare key, had died, not recently, over a year ago. Which meant when Carla assumed she'd gotten the key back before Sandra moved, she might have been misremembering. She might have never gotten it back at all. And whatever Sandra had done with it in the time since, or whoever had gone through her things after she passed that, was something no one could account for anymore. The locksmith said the locks he replaced were old, the kind that had been there since probably the 80s, the kind that weren't hard to copy. The police looked into it a little more after we gave them Sandra's name and the timeline. I don't know what they found, if anything. Carla didn't hear back from them in any meaningful way. These things don't always resolve. Most of the time, the story just stops, rather than ends. Carla has new locks now. She also has one of those video doorbells which she resisted for months and now checks obsessively. Biscuit still hates everyone, and I still think about that key, not every day, not even every week, but sometimes when I'm about to pick something up, a set of keys, a mug, anything I haven't just set down, I pause just for a second, just long enough to wonder. Because warmth means something. Warmth means something was just there. And if something was just there, it means you almost caught it. Almost.